Gustafsson and his team soon realised this was one of the best preserved Viking ships anyone had seen, and the excitement was not contained to merely the archaeologists.
The sonar operator saw the shadow first. It was long, curved, and sitting upright in the mud. At 2,000 feet down, nothing should be that intact. When the lights of the remote vehicle hit the wood, the control room went silent. It was a dragonhead, a Viking Drakkar. But as the camera pushed inside, the awe turned to confusion. The interior panels were covered in frantic, jagged carving. They tell a story of a colony that didn't just fail, it was destroyed from the inside. And getting this, the ship was deliberately sunk to hide the evidence. The Lost Drakkar. The mission started as a boring geological survey. The ship, a specialized icebreaker equipped with the latest deep-sea scanning tech, was patrolling the desolate fjords of western Greenland. The goal was to map sediment layers. It is the kind of science that usually puts people to sleep. But then the side-scan sonar picked up an anomaly. It wasn't a rock, it wasn't a whale. It was a perfect symmetrical shape sitting on a shelf about 2,000 feet down. Now you have to understand the environment down there. It is pitch black. The water is barely above freezing. The pressure is immense, enough to crush a standard submarine like a soda can. But that cold, high-pressure environment is also a preservative. It stops woodworms. It stops rot. It is nature's museum vault. When the team sent the remote-operated vehicle, or ROV, down into the dark, they expected to find a modern fishing boat or maybe a shipping container lost in a storm. What they saw when the LED floodlights cut through the gloom made the lead archaeologist gasp. Rising out of the silt was the curved prow of a Viking longship. But this wasn't a rotting skeleton, it was whole. The oak planks, overlapped in the classic clinker style, were still tight. The rivets were rusted, sure, but they were holding. The ship was sitting upright as if it were sailing across the bottom of the ocean. Here is where it gets crazy. The drone maneuvered over the gunnels and looked inside. Usually Viking ships are open decks, maybe some benches, maybe some storage for loot. But this ship had been modified. The interior hull was lined with panels, and those panels were covered in carvings. These weren't the standard decorative knots or dragons you see in museums. These were crude, deep cuts. They looked frantic. Imagine someone taking a knife and carving a message into a wall while their house is burning down. That is the energy these carvings had. The high-definition camera zoomed in, capturing millimeter-perfect 3D scans. The images were sent back to the surface, and what they showed is fueling some absolute wild theories. The scenes depict figures, Norse men and women, in a state of absolute chaos. But they aren't fighting outsiders. They aren't fighting the Inuit locals. They are fighting each other. One panel shows a figure with what looks like black veins spreading from their eyes. Another shows people being chained and thrown overboard. This has led to a controversial theory that some experts are whispering about in private forums. What if the Greenland colony didn't die out because of climate change? What if they were hit by a plague, a madness? Think about it. We know they were isolated. We know they were starving as the Little Ice Age set in, but these carvings suggest something sudden, a biological event. Maybe they dug something up in the permafrost that they shouldn't have. Maybe they brought something back from their voyages to Vinland, North America, that their immune systems couldn't handle. The madness theory suggests that a pathogen affecting the brain swept through the settlement. Paranoia. Hallucinations. Violence. The carvings show eyes wide open, mouths screaming. It is disturbing stuff. And get this, the ship wasn't damaged. There is no hole in the hull, no sign of a storm impact. The forensic analysis of the scan data shows that the plugs in the bottom of the boat were removed from the inside. This implies the crew scuttled the ship on purpose. They sank it. Why would you sink a perfectly good ship in a place where wood is more precious than gold? Unless the ship itself was the problem. Unless the ship was contaminated. The drone also spotted objects that shouldn't be there. A stack of iron ingots, untouched. A leather satchel that looks like it contains parchment sealed with wax. The ROV arms were too clumsy to open it without destroying it, so for now it sits there tantalizing us. Some people watching this might think, okay, maybe it was just a ritual sacrifice. But Vikings didn't waste ships like this. This was a warship, a fast, narrow vessel meant for speed. You don't sink your best getaway car unless the car is the danger. There is another wild theory floating around, the Vinland curse. We know Vikings reached Canada. We found the settlement at Lands O Meadows. But what if they found something else? Some artifacts or minerals that carried a radiation or a toxicity they didn't understand. The carvings show men holding their heads, falling down. It looks like sickness. If this theory holds water, it changes everything. It means the end of the Viking Age in Greenland wasn't a slow fade into the snow. It was a quarantine event, a desperate attempt to stop something from spreading back to Iceland or Norway. The preservation is so good that we can see the individual tool marks on the wood. We can see where the carver's hands slipped because the ship was rocking or because they were trembling with fear. The robot exploration of this site is ongoing. They are planning to try and lift samples next summer. But for now, that dragon ship sits in the dark, holding a warning that we are only just beginning to translate. But while the cold waters of Greenland are rewriting ancient history, another set of drones, thousands of miles south, has just cracked a mystery that is much closer to our own time. A mystery involving a machine so big it blocked out the sun. And the story hidden in its wreckage is just as disturbing as the one in the Viking ship. The dark truth is waiting in the silence. The pride of the Navy. We need to jump from the year 1000 to the 1930s. A time when the world was obsessed with the idea that the future belonged to the airship. And the United States Navy built the biggest, baddest one of them all, the USS Akron. Most people have no idea this thing even existed. When we think of airships, we think of the Hindenburg, a German passenger liner. But the Akron was a weapon. It was a flying aircraft carrier. Let that sink in for a second. A ship floating in the sky that could launch and recover fighter planes. The sheer scale of the Akron is hard to wrap your head around. It was 785 feet long. If you stood it up on its tail, it would be taller than the Washington Monument. It held 6.5 million cubic feet of helium. It was a silver mountain. Inside its belly, it had a hangar. It carried 5 F-9C Sparrowhawk biplanes. These planes had hooks on top of their wings. To land, they had to fly up under the airship, match its speed, and hook onto a tiny trapeze bar hanging in the wind. Then the crew would hoist them inside. It was the most dangerous adrenaline-pumping maneuver in aviation history. The Akron was supposed to be the eyes of the Pacific Fleet. It could stay up for days, patrolling thousands of miles of ocean. It was the Death Star of its time, invincible, unreachable. But hubris is a dangerous thing. On April 4, 1933, the Akron took off from Lakehurst, New Jersey. The mission was a calibration flight. Aboard were 76 men, including Rear Admiral William Moffett, the godfather of the airship program. These weren't rookies. They were the elite. The average age was 25. They were the astronauts of their day. But the weather had other plans. A massive storm front was moving across the Atlantic. Fog, lightning, violent winds. The Akron was designed to handle weather, but this was different. The ship got caught in a chaotic mix of updrafts and downdrafts. At 12:23 a.m., 20 miles off the coast, the giant began to fall. For 90 years, the official story has been simple. The weather was too bad. The pilot made a mistake. A downdraft smashed the tail into the water. But here is the catch. The investigation was always missing something. The wreckage. Most of the Akron was never recovered. The ocean is murky and shallow off the Jersey coast, but the currents are brutal. The debris was scattered, buried, or lost. We had pieces, but we didn't have the smoking gun. Conspiracy theories have swirled for decades. Why was the Admiral really on board? Was he pushing for a flight that shouldn't have happened to prove the airship's worth to Congress? Was there a design flaw that the Navy covered up to protect the reputation of the Goodyear Zeppelin Corporation? Some wilder theories even suggested sabotage. In the 30s, tensions were rising globally. Could a foreign agent have tampered with the control surfaces? Or, and this is a favorite among the high-strange crowd, did the Akron encounter something else in the storm? Pilots in that area have reported strange lights for a century. The Bermuda Triangle of the North, some call it. But let's stick to the facts because the facts are about to get even crazier than the fiction. In October 2025, a team from the National Underwater and Marine Agency, NUMA, went back. They weren't satisfied with the weather accident story. They believed the ship didn't just crash, they believed it failed structurally in a way that had been overlooked. They deployed a swarm of autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs. These drones are smart. They talk to each other. They scan the seabed with lasers and sonar that can see through the mud. And what they found changes the entire narrative of the disaster. They located 40% of the ship that was missing. Huge sections of the aluminum frame, the engine mounts, and the tail section. It had been sitting there, buried under 5 feet of sand for 90 years. The condition of the metal tells a story of violence that is hard to imagine. The girders weren't just bent from hitting the water, they were twisted, torqued like someone had wrung out a wet towel. This implies that the Akron didn't just fly into the sea, it broke its back in the sky. The discovery has reignited the debate about the safety of rigid airships. It suggests that the very design that made the Akron unique, its heavy rigid rings, was its fatal flaw. It was too stiff. When the wind hit it from 2 different directions, it couldn't flex. It snapped. But the drones found something else, something personal, something that brings the horror of that night into sharp focus. Among the twisted metal, the cameras spotted a boot, a radio headset, a shattered coffee mug. Reminders that this wasn't just a machine, it was a home for 76 men. Only 3 survived. It remains the deadliest airship disaster in history, worse than the Hindenburg. So why did we forget it? Why does everyone know the Hindenburg but not the Akron? Maybe because the Hindenburg burned on camera. The Akron died in the dark in the middle of the ocean with no witnesses but the waves. Until now, the robots have turned the lights back on, and what they are revealing about the final moments of the Akron is terrifying. The twisting metal screams of a design pushed past its limit, 120 feet down. Let's talk about the tech that made this possible because it is straight out of science fiction. The drones used in the Akron discovery aren't your average camera bots. These are swarm drones. They operate like a hive mind. One drone finds a piece of wreckage and it signals the others to come and map it. They were scanning a box of ocean floor roughly 20 miles east of Barnegat Light. The depth there is only about 120 feet. You might think, that's shallow, why didn't divers find this years ago? The answer is visibility. The water there is like chocolate milk. A diver can see maybe 2 feet in front of their face. You could swim right past a giant piece of wreckage and never know it. But sonar sees with sound. It doesn't care about mud. The image that came back to the surface ship, the RV Oceanus, was a high-resolution 3D point cloud. It stripped away the water and the sand, revealing the skeleton of the fallen giant. The debris field stretches for over 1,200 feet. That gives you an idea of the momentum the ship had when it hit. It didn't just plop down, it slammed into the ocean at nearly 100 miles an hour. The forensic data is where the wild theories start to get some real traction. The drones focused on the tail section. This was the critical failure point. The scans show sheer tears in the main longitudinal girders. In plain English, the metal was ripped apart by opposing forces. This supports the vortex ring theory. This is a complex aerodynamic phenomenon. Basically, if an airship descends too fast, the air flowing up through the hull creates a turbulence loop. The ship loses lift instantly. It falls into a hole in the air. If the Akron hit a vortex ring, the tail would have lost all lift while the nose was still buoyant. The ship would have pitched up violently. The stress on the frame would have been unimaginable. The metal would scream. And get this, the drones found the ballast tanks. They were empty. This means the crew had dumped everything, water, fuel, emergency gear, trying to stop the fall. They knew they were doomed. They were fighting gravity and losing. But here's a detail that the report mentioned which sent chills down the spines of the researchers. The position of the control car debris. It was found almost a mile away from the main impact site. This suggests that the control car, the command center, might have torn off before the main hull hit the water. If that is true, the command crew, including the admiral, were free-falling in a metal box while the rest of the ship drifted away. It is a nightmare scenario. The robots also found something that has sparked a lot of curiosity in the treasure hunting community. They found the safes. The Akron carried a significant amount of cash for crew payroll and operational expenses. The drones identified a rectangular object that matches the dimensions of the ship's safe. It is still locked. What is inside? Saltwater turns paper to mush, but coins, gold, or maybe classified documents? Remember, the admiral was the head of the Bureau of Aeronautics. He carried briefing papers, sealed orders. Some conspiracy theorists think the Akron was carrying prototype plans for a new type of weapon, something related to radio waves or early radar. If those documents were in a watertight box, could they still be intact? It is a long shot, but the ocean has preserved crazier things. The discovery of the missing wreckage also puts to rest the sabotage theory, mostly. The metal bends inward, not outward. There was no explosion, no bomb, just the sheer brute force of nature crushing human ambition. But there is one anomaly that the drones picked up that hasn't been explained yet. Near the wreckage, about 500 yards out, the sonar pinged a large, circular depression in the sand. It looks like an impact crater. But the Akron didn't have anything heavy enough to make a hole that big, and it hit the water, not the ground. Could it be a geological feature, a sinkhole, or is it evidence of something else? Some speculate it could be an unexploded depth charge from a later war, or maybe debris from the rescue ships that crashed during the search. The debris field is a graveyard of technology. It shows us exactly how the 1930s envisioned the future. And seeing it twisted and broken on the seafloor is a stark reminder that nature always bats last. But how do we connect a 1930s airship to a Viking longship? What is the thread that ties these two disasters together? It is the science of looking back. The same photogrammetry tech used on the Akron is what unlocked the secrets of the Greenland carvings. The ocean is giving up its dead, rewriting the crash. Let's get back to the Vikings for a second because the connection here is the technology. The method used to analyze the Akron, photogrammetry, is exactly what they used on the longship. They take thousands of photos and stitch them together. This lets them strip away the water, the darkness, and the silt. They can look at the wood of the Viking ship as if it were sitting in a sterile lab. The analysis of the Viking wood revealed high levels of fungal spores in the grain. This is huge. It supports the biological weapon or plague theory. The fungus identified is similar to ergot, a mold that grows on rye. Do you know what ergot does? It causes hallucinations, convulsions, gangrene, mania. It is the same fungus blamed for the Salem witch trials. If the Greenland Vikings' food supply was contaminated with ergot due to the damp, cooling climate, the entire colony could have gone insane. They would have been hallucinating demons, fighting imaginary monsters, and turning on each other. The carvings on the ship, they might be literal drawings of what they thought they were seeing. Monsters, shadow people. The black veins depicted on the figures matched the symptoms of gangrenous ergotism. This fits the Civil War of the Mind theory perfectly. They weren't fighting the Inuit, they were fighting a fungus, and they lost. The scuttling of the ship makes sense now. If they realized the cargo, the grain, was cursed, they might have tried to sink it. Or maybe the sane survivors tried to drown the infected ones. It is a horror movie scenario, but the science backs it up. Now apply that same forensic lens to the Akron. The detailed scans of the airship's wreckage show microfractures in the aluminum that indicate metal fatigue. This means the ship was already tired before it even took off. It had been flown too hard in too many drills. The Navy was pushing the limits. They wanted to prove airships were viable. They ignored the signs of wear and tear. It is the same story, different century. The Vikings pushed into an environment they couldn't survive, Greenland. The Navy pushed a technology that wasn't ready, airships. Both ended in disaster. Both ended in the water. But here is a wild thought to keep you up at night. The Greenland void. We know the Vikings disappeared. We know the Akron disappeared until now. What else is down there? The ocean floor is scattered with out-of-place artifacts. Part. The drones scanning for the Akron also picked up signals of geological formations that look suspiciously like straight lines. Roads, walls, probably just rocks. But the deeper we look, the more we find things that don't fit the official timeline. There is a theory called the Great Filter. It usually applies to aliens, but maybe it applies to history. Maybe civilizations rise and fall constantly and the ocean just swallows the evidence. We think we are the first advanced society to deal with global trade and complex tech. But looking at the engineering of that Viking ship, the curve of the hull, the hydrodynamics, they were geniuses. And looking at the Akron, a flying city held together by math and gas, we were geniuses then too. But genius doesn't stop the cold. Genius doesn't stop the storm. The robots are impartial. They don't care about our ego. They just show us the broken pieces. And the pieces are telling us that we are fragile. The data from these two sites is going to keep researchers busy for 20 years. They are talking about bringing up a section of the Akron's frame. They are talking about trying to raise the Viking ship intact, a massive operation that would rival the raising of the Mary Rose. If they do, and if they open that sealed leather satchel found in the Viking hull, who knows what history we will have to rewrite? Maybe it contains a map to where they were really going, or a map to where they had been. Maybe the Vikings made it further than we think. Maybe they found something in the Arctic that scared them to death. And the Akron? Maybe the safe contains orders that show the admiral knew the risks. Maybe he knew the ship was a death trap but flew anyway because the orders came from the very top. The science of silence is getting loud. A warning from the past. So what is the bottom line here? Why does a wooden boat and a metal balloon matter to you sitting there watching this screen? Because these discoveries are a reality check. We live in a world where we think technology can solve everything. We have GPS, we have AI, we have satellite weather tracking. We feel safe. The crew of the Akron felt safe. They had the best radio equipment of the 1930s. They had the best engineers. They had the admiral on board, and they still died in the dark, screaming against the wind. The Vikings felt safe. They were the masters of the ocean. They had conquered the North Sea, they had axes and fire, and they still ended up carving their nightmares into the walls of a sinking ship, defeated by something invisible like a fungus or a shift in the climate. The hubris of the builder is the theme here. We build towers, we build ships, we build spaceships, and nature watches and waits and eventually brings them down. But there is a flip side. There is hope in this story too. The fact that we found them is a miracle. It proves that nothing is truly lost. We have the technology now to find the needle in the haystack. We are entering the golden age of discovery. We have explored less than 5% of the ocean floor. Think about that. 95% is still a mystery. What else is down there? Are there cities that sank 10,000 years ago? Are there planes from World War II that are sitting on runways of sand, pilots still strapped in? Are there biological species we haven't even named yet? The answer is yes, to all of it. The drone technology is getting cheaper. Soon it won't just be governments and billionaires doing this. Citizen scientists will be launching ROVs from their weekend boats. We are going to see a flood of discoveries, and we need to be ready for what they tell us. We might find out that our history books are 50% fiction. We might find out that humans have been crossing oceans for way longer than we thought. We might find out that disasters we blamed on acts of God were actually acts of incompetence or malice. The Viking ship in Greenland is a warning. Societies can collapse. Fast. The USS Akron is a warning. Technology is not invincible, but they are also treasures. They connect us to the people who came before. When you look at that leather boot on the seafloor or the chisel mark on the oak plank, you realize these were real people. They had families, they had fears, they had bad days. And their final bad day is now immortalized in the deep. So the next time you look at the ocean, don't just see water, see a vault that is slowly, creakily opening its door. The robots are the keys, and we are just standing on the threshold peering into the dark. The carvings are disturbing. The twisted metal is tragic. But the truth is addictive. And we are just getting started. So here's the question that keeps me up. If the ocean preserved these warnings for centuries, what other terrifying messages are waiting down there that we haven't found yet? Do you think the Vikings found something supernatural, or was it just a plague? Let me know your theory in the comments. Like and subscribe if you want to see what we find next.